Thor didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just froze. His entire frame locked, muscles coiled, ears pricked so far forward they looked like they might snap. His eyes were locked on the rusted cargo ship at the far end of Pier 19, like he was watching something move inside that no human could see. Sergeant Quinn Haar didn't need him to say anything. She felt it in the leash. A tremor, subtle but unmistakable. Not fear, not aggression. Something deeper. Instinct, detection, purpose. "What is it, Thor?" she whispered, tightening her grip on the leash. "What do you see?" The 4-year-old Malinois didn't look back. He let out a low, guttural sound, somewhere between a growl and a warning, then launched forward so hard the leash snapped taut and nearly yanked Quinn off her feet. "Whoa!" she said, staggering to keep up as he pulled her toward the ship. The Sea Warden had been docked and dead for nearly 8 years, its last voyage a failed freight contract, its rusted hull a constant argument between City Council and the Harbour Authority. Officially sealed, technically condemned, and to most people, forgotten. But not to Thor. Quinn pulled her radio from her vest as she jogged behind the dog, weaving between stacked lobster traps and a line of market stalls starting to wake for the weekend rush. "This is Unit 3, she said into the mic. "I'm at Pier 19 with K9, possible 1037 on the Sea Warden. Send backup. No sirens." The dispatcher responded, calm but quick. "Copy that, Unit 3. Backup en route." Thor didn't wait. He hit the foot of the gangway and barked once, short, sharp, urgent, then lunged up the incline like the rotting planks weren't even there. Quinn cursed under her breath. She'd taken him out for a light morning patrol. Nothing more, just her and her dog, walking the waterline before the tourists came. She wasn't supposed to be drawing her sidearm on a rusted freighter. But here she was. The deck groaned under her boots. Salt air and diesel mingled with the metallic stench of decay. Seagulls shrieked overhead, offended by the intrusion. Thor darted left, nose down, tail flat and stiff behind him. "Thor, easy!" she called, but she didn't expect him to stop. He zigzagged toward a hatch on the starboard side, nose skimming every inch of rust-flaked metal. Then he froze again. He let out a sound Quinn rarely heard from him, a low, urgent whine that vibrated straight into her chest. She knelt beside him, heart hammering. "What is it, partner?" He pressed his nose to the seam of the hatch, then backed up slightly and sat. Waiting. Quinn swallowed hard. Her flashlight beam cut through the dust and gloom as she examined the latch. It wasn't locked, just old and jammed with years of corrosion. She braced a shoulder and gave it a shove. The hatch creaked open just wide enough to release a breath of cold, sour air, like wet wood and something sweet turned bad. She clicked on her light and ducked, inside. The cargo hold was tight and darker than night, the beam catching motes of dust that floated like ash. Stacked crates lined the walls, most faded and half-collapsed, stenciled markings blurred by time. Thor slipped in beside her, low to the ground, moving like a ghost. Then he stopped, tail rigid, head dropped. Quinn followed the beam of his gaze and saw it, a crate near the far corner, newer than the rest, its wood pale and scarred. And from inside, barely audible, a noise, a whimper. She froze. "LAPD," she called, keeping her voice steady. "If someone's in there, we're here to help." No answer. Thor crept forward and lay down, chest to the floor, ears angled forward like radar. He pressed his side to the crate, protective. Quinn's throat tightened. She moved in, pulled her multi-tool from her belt, and wedged the pry bar end into the edge. Wood groaned as the nails gave. The gap opened. A flash of pale skin, a shape huddled under a dirty blanket, and two wide eyes staring up at her from the shadows. "Hey," she said softly. "It's okay. You're safe now. A small hand clutched a tattered stuffed bunny tighter. The child didn't speak. Then a whisper. "Please, don't let him come back." Quinn froze. "He who?" But the girl only shook her head and buried her face again. Thor lay still, gaze locked on the opening, unmoving. Quinn keyed her radio. "Unit 3 requesting immediate backup. No lights, no sirens. I've got a juvenile female, approximately 6 to 7 years old, alive, injured. We need EMS and child services at Pier 19. Enter via warehouse access." She looked at the girl again. The rope, the crate, the fear. It wasn't an accident. This was intentional, and whoever had put her here wasn't gone for good. As Quinn reached in to free the rope tied cruelly around the girl's ankle, Thor let out another low growl. His body stiffened. Then she heard it, just outside the hatch. Footsteps. Slow. Watching. Then retreating fast. She turned, but saw only a flicker of shadow vanish between the stalls of the early morning market. He had been watching them, up until the very last second. Thor rose, his eyes still fixed on the opening. "Yeah," Quinn said softly, holding the girl close. "This isn't over." The girl didn't speak at first, not when Sergeant Quinn Ha gently peeled back the edge of the blanket, not when she offered water, not even when Thor pressed his warm body against the side of the crate and gave a soft huff, the kind he reserved for frightened animals and elderly men in hospital beds. Instead, the girl stayed curled in a tight ball, gripping a stuffed bunny whose ears were chewed flat and crusted with dirt. Quinn had seen a lot in her years on patrol. Drug dens, overdoses, broken people in broken places. But this? A child, hidden like cargo on a dead ship. It was a different kind of wrong. She crouched lower, using the softest voice she could manage. "My name's Quinn. This is Thor. He's a police dog. You're safe now." The girl shifted slightly, her face still mostly hidden. A few strands of matted hair stuck to her cheek. Her lips moved, but the words barely made it out. "Please, don't let him come back." Quinn's breath caught. Her fingers curled tighter around the multi-tool still in her hand. "Who?" she asked gently. "The man who brought you here." No answer. Thor lay down fully now, resting his chin on the floor just inches from the crate. His eyes never left the girl's face. There was no wag in his tail, no bounce in his posture. Only the kind of stillness that came from pure awareness, a dog who knew his presence mattered more than anything Quinn could say. The girl reached out slowly, hand trembling, and pressed her fingers into the short fur on Thor's forehead. He didn't move, just blinked once. She didn't pull away. Quinn clicked her radio again, keeping her tone even. "Update from Unit 3. Juvenile is conscious, alert, approximately age 6 to 7. Possible trauma indicators. Begin medical staging outside Pier 19. No audible approach." A crackle of acknowledgement returned, but she hardly heard it. Her focus was on the child now inching toward the edge of the crate. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Quinn asked. The girl shook her head, then whispered, "Lena." Quinn felt her chest tighten. Names made things real. "I'm going to lift you out, okay? We'll go slow. You're not alone." She worked carefully, loosening the last of the rope around Lena's ankle. There were raw lines in the skin, not deep, but clearly fresh. She didn't ask how long she'd been there. That answer could wait. Right now, she just needed to get her out of this rotting box. Lena clung to her bunny like a lifeline as Quinn lifted her into her arms. The girl was lighter than she should have been. Bones wrapped in too little muscle, body chilled from the ship's cold belly. Thor stood immediately, close at Quinn's side as she backed through the hatch, the flashlight beam cutting through the shadows ahead. The noise outside had changed. A gull cried high overhead, but below that there was movement on the pier. Quinn stopped at the top of the gangway. There was a man standing at the far edge of the dock. Not moving, not calling out, just watching. He wore a dark jacket, hands deep in his pockets, face shadowed by the curve of a ball cap. Quinn froze. The wind shifted, and Thor growled low, not loud but unmistakable. The man turned and walked away, casual at first, then disappearing fast between the stacks of crates and tents near the market. Quinn's pulse jumped. She backed down the gangway, pressing Lena closer. The girl had buried her face in her shoulder now, her body rigid. "It's him," she whispered. "You're okay. He's not coming back for you." Quinn murmured. She keyed her mic again. Possible suspect spotted near Pier 19. Male, dark jacket, ball cap, headed east toward vendor stalls. Request quiet containment. 1 unit on foot, if possible. Thor stayed glued to her side the entire way back to the cruiser, scanning the shadows with every step. By the time they reached the vehicle, backup was arriving. Officers in plain vests moved in near-silent coordination. One peeled off to follow the direction Quinn had indicated. But the man was already gone. They'd lost him in the crowd. Inside the cruiser, Quinn placed Lena gently in the back seat. Thor jumped in beside her, settling without a word of command. The girl's small hands reached for him again, one clutching the bunny, the other buried deep in the thick fur at his neck. Thor curled slightly, enough to shield her body with his own. Quinn climbed into the driver's seat and paused before starting the engine. She looked in the rearview mirror and saw Lena's face pressed to Thor's side, her eyes closed, her breathing finally starting to slow. "You're okay, kid," Quinn said softly. "He can't hurt you now." But the words tasted hollow, because she knew this wasn't over. You don't stash a child in a crate on a ghost ship unless you plan on coming back for her. Back at the station, Quinn bypassed the main entrance and pulled into the secure lot. No flashing lights, no cameras, no chance for anyone to see something they weren't supposed to. Thor jumped out first, alert but calm. Quinn opened the back door and helped Lena down, keeping one arm around her shoulders. The girl didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her hand found Thor again, and that was enough. The interview room they used for juveniles wasn't harsh like the others. No glass mirrors, no steel chairs, just a carpeted floor, soft lighting, and neutral walls. Thor padded in ahead of them and circled once before lying down in the corner. Lena sat in the far chair, Bunny still clutched tight. Quinn knelt in front of her. "You're safe, Lena. You're with people who care now." The girl didn't answer, but her eyes slid toward Thor. "He's a good listener," Quinn said. "Better than me, honestly." Lena whispered something. Quinn leaned closer. "He found me," she said. Quinn blinked back, the sting in her eyes. Yes, he did. A knock came at the door. Officer Joe Ramirez stepped in, holding a fleece blanket. "For the kid," she said softly. "Thanks." Quinn handed it to Lena, who pulled it around her shoulders and curled in on herself. Her eyes never left Thor. He didn't move either. Just lay there, sentinel still. Outside the room, Quinn found Captain Mark Tran reviewing camera feeds from the pier. The footage showed exactly what she expected. A blurry man in a dark jacket, moving through the background like smoke. "You think he was watching the whole time?" Tran asked. "I think he was waiting to make sure she didn't come back out." Tran nodded, jaw tight. "I'll put every eye I have on that pier." Back in the interview room, Lena had drifted to sleep with Thor curled beside her. The blanket had slipped, and her hand was still knotted in his fur. Quinn stood in the doorway, watching the two of them. "You did good, partner," she whispered. And Thor, steadfast, silent, alert, watched the door like he was daring the world to try again. The scent hit Thor first. It always did. Sergeant Quinn Ha had barely stepped out of the precinct when the Malinois stiffened, nostrils flaring in the cool, salt air. He turned his head, sniffed again, and gave a single, deliberate huff. Not the alert bark, not the play growl. This was the one she'd learned to respect the most, the pay attention sound. "You've got something," she said quietly, clipping his lead and falling into step. It had been less than 24 hours since they'd pulled Lena from the hold of the Sea Warden. The girl was still at the crisis center, recovering. She hadn't said much more, except one strange detail. The man who took her smelled like candy. The brown kind her mum never let her eat. Clove. Not a scent you forget. Sharp, spicy, almost medicinal. Quinn hadn't given it much thought, until Thor started following it. They moved through the maze of alleys behind the market, passing vendors unloading crates of shrimp, fishmongers stacking tubs of ice. Thor paused often, nose working low along the concrete, then lifting to catch the currents of air that drifted between buildings. Quinn didn't ask questions. She knew his process by now. He wasn't just following scent, he was building a map, cross-referencing memory, movement, environmental change. Every breeze told him something. The trail grew stronger behind Stall F, near the loading dock where the fish market's older vendors still used handcarts and sweat over profit margins measured in quarters. A wide man in a grease-streaked apron leaned over a barrel of mackerel. "Hey, officer," he said, nodding. "Dogs working?" "Always," Quinn said. She showed him a still from the dock camera. Grainy, but the outline of a man in a dark jacket with a low-slung cap was clear enough. The man squinted at it. "Hard to say. Half the waterfront looks like that. Windbreakers, quiet shoes, no eye contact. You want weird, though? We got weird." "I'm listening." "Somebody's been buying crushed ice after close. Late. Real late. Cash only. No name. No fish." "Which boat?" The man looked around, lowered his voice. "Says he's from 14. But there ain't no 14. Quinn felt the shift in her gut. "Anything else?" "The way he walks, smells, talks." The man wiped his hands on a towel and frowned. "Cold. That's how I'd describe him. Like the ice plant itself. Maybe a little sweet. Like those clove cigarettes my brother used to sneak in high school. Real strong." Thor gave a sharp snort beside her. She glanced down. His ears were locked forward, gaze narrowed toward the southern edge of the market, toward the squat, blocky building that housed the Long Ridge Ice Company. "You smell it too, huh?" Quinn murmured. They headed that way, past the last line of vendor stalls and through the narrow corridor behind the bait freezer sheds. The air shifted again. Beneath the usual cocktail of diesel, salt, and fish guts was something else. Clove, not the delicate aroma of a holiday candle. No, this was raw and punchy, like it had been ground fresh and spilled in a pocket. It coated the back of her throat as they neared the ice plant's side entrance. The building itself was old, corrugated walls stained with years of brine and rust. No windows on the lower floor, just a steel service door buzzing faintly from the refrigeration units inside. Quinn knocked once, then pushed the door open. The cold rolled out like fog. Inside, a man with a linebacker build and an easy grin stepped around a pallet of ice bins. "Well, if it isn't my favorite K-9. Elijah Ford said. "And Officer Ha, what brings you to my frozen kingdom?" "We're looking into something that might have passed through here," she said, showing the still again. "This guy, late night, says he's from Boat 14. Elijah scratched his beard. "We don't have a 14, you know that." "I do, but someone else doesn't." Elijah narrowed his eyes. "Cameras?" "Only if you've got them." He nodded. "Dock feed's running. We don't keep interior footage. Union didn't like it. Quinn followed him through a corridor lined with condensation-streaked pipes. Thor trotted beside her, every movement silent except for the soft clack of claws on the painted concrete. The office was cramped, screens flickering in grayscale. Elijah rewound to the last few nights, stopping at a frame from 2 days prior. "Here," he said, pointing. A man stood half in shadow at the loading bay. Cap down. Jacket zipped. Face partially turned away. But there was something unmistakable about his posture. Relaxed in a way that didn't belong in a cold storage yard at midnight. "Can you export that?" Quinn asked. Elijah reached for a thumb drive. "I'll email it too." While he worked, Thor moved down the hallway toward the corridor that led to the coldest part of the facility, the blast freezer rooms. He paused at the entrance to the main chamber, sniffed once, then again, deeper this time. "Hold on," Quinn said, her tone changing. "Thor, what is it?" He stepped forward, one paw, then another, until he stood in front of a steel door labeled Room 2. No bark, no scratch. Just a low breath from deep in his chest. Elijah frowned. "We keep overflow pallets in there. No deliveries since Monday." "Key?" she asked. He handed it over. 3 minutes, Max. You'll freeze." Quinn opened the door. The cold inside slammed her skin like a punch. Frost clung to the walls, the air dense with ammonia and silence. Thor stepped in ahead of her, nose, angled low, then high. His tail straightened. He crossed the room carefully like a soldier clearing space. Then he stopped at the rear wall. There, where 2 metal panels met, Quinn saw it. A faint distortion in the frost. A curve, like someone had opened a seam and pressed it back. Thor sniffed once, then let out a low whine that made every hair on her arm rise. She traced her gloved fingers over the seam. Tiny scratches lined the edge. Too deliberate for shipping damage, too recent for decay. "Elijah," she called, her voice flat. "Get maintenance. I want this wall open, quietly." Within 10 minutes, a technician appeared with a portable driver and the kind of shrug only warehouse crews could perfect. He popped the fasteners, and the panel creaked free. Behind it was a crawl space, just wide enough for one person, just hidden enough for a nightmare. The scent inside was heavier. Clove and something else. Something wrong. Thor stepped forward and sat at the edge, nose working the air like he was trying to memorize it. Quinn reached in with her flashlight. On the floor sat a scrap of pink fabric, twisted in the corner. She bagged it carefully. When she turned, Elijah was staring at the opening. "You think someone's been using this like a passage?" he asked. "I think someone's been moving kids like cargo," Quinn said. "And they're using the harbor like a hunting ground." Thor remained still, eyes locked on the space behind the wall, watching, guarding, and knowing, without question, that this trail was just beginning. The crawl space smelled like frost, rust, and something sickly sweet. It shouldn't have smelled like anything at all. Refrigeration rooms were meant to be sterile, dry, efficient. But the moment the insulated panel peeled back and cold air spilled into the room, Thor's body language changed. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He just stood there, tail down, head low, nostrils flaring with slow, deliberate breaths. His ears locked forward, tracking something that Quinn couldn't see but felt nonetheless. She leaned forward, flashlight beam cutting through the narrow slit behind the wall. The crawl space stretched maybe 8 feet deep, barely wide enough for a grown man to shimmy through. At the far end, something glinted. "Hold this," Quinn said, handing her phone to Elijah, who stood off to the side with a look on his face somewhere between curiosity and disbelief. She crouched low and slipped inside. The space was tight, the air far colder than the main freezer, and the smell of clove hit her like a memory sharpened by adrenaline. It was stronger in here, no longer a hint on the wind, but embedded in the insulation, embedded in the space itself. Whoever had been here hadn't just passed through. They had spent time. At the far end, behind a torn piece of foam padding, Quinn reached for the source of the glint. Her gloved fingers brushed cold metal, round, thin, and slightly crimped. She pulled it free. A foil-wrapped chocolate coin. Gold wrapper, cheap, the kind sold in bulk at dollar stores. But this one had a strange imprint, not the usual dollar sign or pirate skull, but a small ship's wheel, worn and faded. Definitely not standard candy fare, she muttered, slipping it into an evidence pouch. Thor let out a low whine from the entryway. She turned her light downward. There, lodged against the inner corner of the wall, was a torn piece of fleece, pink, frayed on one edge, and dotted with the same faded dolphin print that Quinn remembered from the blanket Lena had clutched in the station. She didn't need a lab to tell her it was hers. "Got it," she said, voice tighter now. "Clothing match. This place was used." Behind her, Thor shifted his weight. She backed out of the crawl space and stood, the cold biting through her sleeves. Elijah reached for the foil wrapper. "Candy?" he asked, frowning. "Lena told us the man who took her smelled like clove," Quinn said. "And she mentioned candy. Brown and spicy. Her mum wouldn't let her have it. So he lured her with this? Maybe. Or comforted her. Or bribed her to stay quiet. Either way, it's his signature." Thor paced once, then returned to the open panel. He stared into the crawl space again, then turned his head toward the rear exit of the freezer corridor. His eyes said it before his body moved. The trail wasn't done. Quinn clipped the leash back on, but she didn't pull. Thor was working now. She knew better than to interrupt him. "Show me." They exited the cold room and stepped into the hallway, the sharp change in air pressure pressing against her eardrums. Thor led them not towards the dock exit, but behind the machinery rooms, past the humming compressors, down a narrow maintenance corridor most workers forgot existed. The smell returned, stronger this time. Not just clove now, but oil and something faintly coppery. Thor stopped at a side door Quinn hadn't noticed earlier. It was metal, painted blue, chipped at the corners. A push bar ran across the middle, and a rusted sign above read, "Employees Only." Quinn pushed through. Outside was a narrow gravel path that ran along the back of the ice plant, wedged between the wall and the chain-link fence that marked the edge of the pier. And that's when she saw it. Footprints, one set, deep in the gravel, leading from the door into the alley. The shoes were light-soled, no obvious brand, but the stride was short. Careful. Not someone running. Someone slipping in and out without being seen. "Elijah," Quinn called behind her. "Who has access to that crawl space?" "No one's supposed to," he replied, appearing at the door, still holding the tablet with the camera footage. The inspection report said the insulation was garbage, but no one mentioned a tunnel. So if someone knew it existed, they'd have to know this building inside and out. Maintenance? Former employee. Maybe, or someone who's been squatting in the harbor long enough to map every blind spot. Quinn's radio buzzed. "Unit 3, do you copy?" She keyed it. "Go ahead." "We just pulled footage from a camera near the service entrance. Time-stamped 3 nights ago. Subject wearing a dark jacket entered the alley behind the plant at 3:41 a.m. Left 6 minutes later. No vehicle seen." Quinn's jaw tensed. 6 minutes was long enough to use the crawl space. Long enough to stash something. Or someone. Thor nosed the air again, then turned back toward the warehouse corridor. He wasn't done. Back inside, Quinn paused at the doorway to room 2. It looked the same as before. Silent, frozen, indifferent. But now it was something else. It was evidence. She turned to Elijah. That space stays sealed. No cleanup, no contractors, no press. He nodded, suddenly serious. I'll post a watch. Quinn knelt beside Thor and rested a hand on his shoulder. You found it, and you told us. The dog gave no reaction, only stared back toward the sealed wall, body taut with restrained instinct. Someone used this place like a box to hide in plain sight, she said quietly. And now they know we're looking. Thor's ears flicked, eyes narrowing toward the back wall again. The hunt wasn't over. It had only just begun. The harbor didn't sleep, but it had its quiet corners. Quinn knew that better than most. While the front of the market bustled with chatter, knives clacking, and vendors shouting out deals over towers of ice-packed fish, the back end was different. Damp, narrow, and lined with sheds that had survived decades of salt air and forgetfulness. Thor's nose twitched. They had circled the ice plant twice before he cut left down a narrow service path behind the stalls. Quinn followed in silence, stepping over a broken pallet and ducking beneath a line of hanging plastic sheeting. The noise from the market faded behind them, replaced by the low hum of compressors and the echo of distant gulls. Thor stopped beside an old storage shed, marked with a faded number 4. The door was padlocked, but the latch hung askew, freshly scratched, as if someone had wrestled with it recently. Quinn crouched beside him. Smell it? She asked. He didn't respond, just stared at the base of the door, his breath slow and focused. The lock wasn't broken. It had been picked, clean, professional. She stood, heart thudding. Let's see what they're hiding. With a short radio call to request backup in the area but hold at a distance, Quinn unclipped the lock and pushed the door open. The hinges groaned. A cool draft rolled out carrying the scent of oil, dust, and something faintly metallic, like old coins soaked in salt water. The shed looked like nothing at first. Spare buoys, crates, a dolly with a flat tire, coiled rope, a pile of cracked ice chests. But Thor didn't hesitate. He moved, straight to the back wall, nose low, body tense. Then he stopped. A sheet of plywood leaned against the rear corner, not fixed, just placed, too precisely to be casual. Thor pawed once at the base. The sound of claw against wood echoed sharply in the small space. Quinn stepped closer, wedging her fingers along the edge. The board shifted with resistance, then gave way. Behind it, darkness. A narrow cavity, barely 2 feet wide, stretched the length of the shed. Not a proper room, more like a forgotten channel between the shed and the building behind it. Cold air clung to the space. The beam from her flashlight caught dust hanging like cobwebs. And then, evidence. A plastic water bottle, half empty. A granola bar wrapper, a balled-up sock. And there, tucked in the far corner, another piece of pink fleece. Quinn knelt. The fabric was frayed and marked with the same faded dolphin print as the scrap in the ice plant. No doubt now. This place had been used. Not once, not briefly. Someone had hidden here, and they hadn't been alone. Footsteps pounded outside. Thor's ears snapped forward. He turned hard, body coiling as if hit by lightning. Quinn followed his gaze through the crack in the open door. A shadow crossed the far edge of the alley. Someone was running. "Move!" she shouted. Thor exploded into motion. Quinn bolted after him, boots slipping on the wet gravel. They burst from the service path into the back lane behind the market. The figure ahead was fast, hooded, lean, and ducking low. He cleared a stack of crates and shoved through the flap of a supply tent. Thor didn't bark. He didn't need to. He was a shadow with muscle. Quinn dodged around a table of bait buckets and caught a glimpse of the man darting through a stall, nearly upending a crate of crab pots. Shouts rose behind them as startled vendors cursed and shouted, "Police! Stop!" The suspect looked back once, eyes wide, face partially covered, but in that moment he made a hard right between two delivery trucks and vanished. Thor reached the alley half a second later, nose to ground, then snapped his head up, confused. Gone, just like that. Quinn slowed, panting, heart pounding. Thor circled the alley, snorting, retracing the edges of the path. His tail twitched once, frustration clear. Whoever he was, he knew this harbor. Too well. Quinn placed a hand on Thor's shoulder. You almost had him, she whispered. Thor stared down the alley, every muscle tight. Back at the shed, uniformed officers had arrived. One lifted the plywood with gloved hands, another began photographing the items inside. Quinn stood at the threshold, staring into the narrow space where someone had eaten, waited, maybe watched. This wasn't random. It was methodical, purposeful. Every hiding spot connected like a buried network. The ship, the crawl space. Now here. Whoever was behind this didn't just know the harbor, they lived in it. She turned, scanning the rooftops and alleys as a chill crept up her neck. Thor was still alert, still staring toward the path the suspect had taken. Quinn felt it now. Not just the hunt. The watching. Someone else was tracking them, following the follow. Thor shifted closer. His gaze rose from the ground to the line of buildings that rimmed the market. And for the first time since this began, Quinn didn't feel like she was chasing someone. She felt like she'd walked into his maze. And he was watching her run. The map was coming to life. On the whiteboard inside the Harbour Division's briefing room, red lines stretched between dots that marked known locations. The Sea Warden, the ice plant, the back shed behind Stall 4. Each one connected by footpaths, blind alleys, and service corridors hidden in plain sight. He's not just hiding, Captain Tran said, arms crossed. He's nesting. Sergeant Quinn Haar stared at the board. It wasn't just about Lena anymore. This was a system, a lattice of decay and neglect that someone had crawled into like a parasite. No way this was opportunistic. Thor paced quietly behind her, ears up, tail still. Alert but patient, like he already knew where to go next. And he did. He moved to the door. Quinn didn't say a word. She clipped the lead and followed him out. They crossed through the back of the fish market again, the heat rising off the pavement in waves. The harbour was alive with its usual distractions, vendors shouting, forklifts beeping, gulls shrieking overhead. But Thor ignored it all. His body language changed 3 blocks out from the precinct. A subtle shift. His head dropped, nose twitching, tracking left. He pulled her toward an old warehouse near Fulton Wharf. It had once belonged to a packaging company, now boarded up and tagged with graffiti. No active leases, no cameras, just one rusted loading bay and a side door that leaned slightly off its hinges. Thor sat, waiting. Here? Quinn asked. He looked up, then back at the door. She moved carefully, hand brushing her holster. No signs of recent entry, but she knew better by now. Whoever this was, he knew how to erase footprints, but he hadn't figured out how to hide scent. She tested the door, unlocked. Inside, the air was stale, hot and still. Rows of old shelves sagged under the weight of dust and broken crates. Thor moved fast, nose low, weaving through aisles like he'd memorized a scent trail laid days ago. He stopped at a staircase leading to a metal catwalk that ran above the main floor. Quinn followed, each step creaking under her boots. At the end of the walkway was a makeshift office, glass panels smeared with grime, blinds half torn. She nudged the door open with her elbow. What she saw stopped her cold. A folding chair sat in the middle of the room. On the floor beside it, a shoebox. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them, all printed on glossy paper, most bent at the edges. Children, some walking to school, some playing at parks, some standing near market stalls. All taken from a distance. She picked one up. Lena. Her pink fleece hoodie was unmistakable, the same one they'd found scraps of in the ice plant and the shed. In this photo she was walking along the waterfront, clutching her stuffed bunny, completely unaware. Quinn's chest tightened. This wasn't a crime of desperation. It was a hunt. She heard the creak too late. Footsteps, on the stairs. Thor was already in motion. Quinn dropped the photo and drew her weapon as the suspect turned the corner at the bottom of the catwalk. Late 30s, thin, long legs, hoodie, low cap. His eyes flicked up. Recognition. He bolted. Police! Stop! She didn't wait. Thor launched down the stairs ahead of her, paws clanging against metal. The suspect shoved through the exit, daylight bursting in as he vanished into the alley behind the building. Quinn hit the radio. Unit 3 in pursuit. Male suspect, brown hoodie, moving east along Fulton backline. Thor's tracking. Send units to intercept at Bay and Crescent. She chased hard. The man darted across a loading zone, leapt over a pallet of plastic wrap, and disappeared between two dumpsters. Thor was right behind, weaving through obstacles, his breathing fast but steady. The suspect made a mistake at the chain-link fence. He tried to climb. Thor didn't. He went under. By the time the man dropped to the other side, Thor was already there, springing forward, his jaws clamping on the back of the hoodie. The suspect twisted, tried to kick, but Thor held. Quinn caught up seconds later, weapon raised. Hands out! Now! The man froze. His breath came in ragged gasps, chest heaving. She moved in fast, grabbed his wrists, cuffed them behind his back before he could think of running again. Thor released his hold, stepping back but not turning away. Quinn stood, panting, blood pounding in her ears. What's your name? The man said nothing. She yanked the wallet from his back pocket. No ID, just a folded piece of paper and a photo of a different girl, maybe 8, blonde, walking with a lunchbox. Quinn's stomach dropped. Who is she? Still no answer. The patrol units arrived seconds later. They took the man into custody while Quinn and Thor stood to the side, breathing hard, watching as the warehouse faded into background noise. Back at the station, Prince finally came through. Name, Eli Mercer. 2 prior arrests out of Oregon. 1 for stalking, 1 for possession of stolen property. Charges dropped both times. No fixed address. No employment history. But 3 locations he'd listed as temporary residences. All near coastal towns. All with missing children reports filed in the same month. Quinn stood outside the interrogation room, arms folded. Thor sat beside her, calm now, but not relaxed. His eyes never left the glass. He's not the top, she said. Tran nodded. But he's part of something. Quinn looked down at Thor, then back at Mercer behind the glass. This wasn't random, she said. It's a pattern, and he didn't build it alone. Thor stood, ears pricked. The hunt had just escalated, and this time they weren't following breadcrumbs. They were chasing the spider in his own web. Eli Mercer sat slouched in the cold metal chair, arms folded tight against his chest. His hoodie had been confiscated, leaving him in a thin grey undershirt that clung to his bony frame. Despite the room's chill, a thin sheen of sweat glistened on his brow. His lips curled upward, not in discomfort, but amusement. Quinn Ha stood on the other side of the table, arms crossed. She hadn't spoken in a full minute. She didn't need to. Eli finally chuckled. You think you got something? Thor, lying by the wall behind Quinn, lifted his head. His eyes locked on Eli, unblinking, silent. Still, but his presence filled the room like pressure before a storm. You ran, Quinn said quietly. Eli smiled wider. Wouldn't you? A mutt like that barreling toward you? He's not just a dog. Eli's grin twitched. "Tell me where Lena is," Quinn said, her voice calm, measured. Eli leaned forward. "You think this is about her?" He let the question hang in the air. Quinn didn't flinch. "I'm not the only one." He added, voice dropping. "I'm just the one dumb enough to stick around too long." "You said too much." "Did I?" He leaned back again, hands cuffed to the loop on the table. "You think you found the center, but you're just scratching the surface." Thor shifted. A soft growl rumbled in his chest. Quinn didn't stop him. Eli didn't blink. "Cute trick. Won't make a difference. You could raid every dock in this city and still not touch them." Quinn narrowed her eyes. "Them." Eli shrugged. "Clock's ticking, Sergeant." Outside the room, Captain Tran watched through the glass. His face was tight, jaw locked. He turned as Officer Martin stepped in beside him, holding a yellow folder. "You'll want to see this," Martin said. Inside, sketches, drawn in crayon on lined paper. By Lena. Each page showed a different location. A big red boat, a hallway with numbers scratched into the walls, a room full of crates, a door with a blue sticker. And next to every picture, the same figure. A dog. Big ears, sharp eyes, standing guard. She remembered him. Tran murmured. She drew this without prompting. Said it was the dog who smelled the bad places. One map showed a crooked path through the harbour, matching the route Thor had taken almost exactly. Quinn joined them moments later. She scanned the drawings, her fingers brushing the paper like it might speak. "She saw more than we thought," she said. "She was moved multiple times." Martin added. "Short intervals, always through service paths and boat slips, places off the grid." Tran nodded slowly. They were testing the water, seeing how long they could keep her under radar. She wasn't the first. "No," Quinn agreed. "And Eli's not the last." Back in the interview room, Eli hummed to himself now, tapping his fingers against the metal like a child waiting for recess. Quinn watched him from the glass. "He's not a planner," she said. "He's a runner, low level, keeps eyes on the property, moves the kids when told." "Then who's pulling the strings?" Martin asked. Quinn looked down at Thor, who sat quietly by her leg. He blinked once, then turned his head toward the window as if he'd heard something only he could hear. "She said something else," Martin added, "right before we left the hospital." Quinn turned back. Lena asked if the lady with the blue stone ring would find her again. Quinn's heart kicked. She never mentioned a woman before. Maybe she didn't know if she was real. Or maybe, Tran said, the woman didn't want to be remembered. Quinn exhaled slowly. They had a pattern. They had a trail. And somewhere out there, someone was still watching. Someone who didn't expect a girl to survive. Someone who didn't expect a war dog to fight like he was born for it. She looked back at Thor. "We follow her map." Thor's tail didn't wag. He simply stood. Ready. The abandoned trawler had been stripped of everything useful years ago. Nets, engines, even the nameplate. Now it rocked slightly in the brackish water behind Dock 12, half sunk in rot and rust, forgotten by everyone but gulls and ghosts. But tonight, at exactly 2:17 a.m., something buzzed to life inside. It wasn't loud. A soft vibration, a tinny jingle echoing off the steel hull. A burner phone, duct-taped under the wheel console, lit up once. Unknown caller. No voicemail, no second ring. Just one call. Long enough to answer. And Quinn Ha, standing on the dock in her Kevlar and windbreaker, picked it up on the first ring with a gloved hand. She didn't speak. Neither did the caller. Then, in a voice distorted, distant, and male, "You have something of ours." Silence. A long, deliberate beat. You'll know when it's time to trade. Click. No trace. No repeat. Just the low groan of the water against the boat and the sharp inhale of every officer watching from the shadows. Thor stood at Quinn's side, muscles taut beneath his harness. He hadn't made a sound, but his ears were high and his breath came sharp. He had heard every word, understood every shift in tension. Captain Tran was already moving. Scrambled the trace team. This wasn't just a threat, it was a marker. Quinn stared at the blank phone screen. They know we have Eli. Or they want us to think that's all they care about. Thor trotted once around the edge of the dock, nose low, then doubled back and nudged the underside of the console. His head tilted. A low whine. Something else? Quinn asked. He stepped back and sat, staring at the bolted floor. Quinn knelt and ran her hand beneath the console edge. Her fingers touched something smooth and cold. A second phone. Office no SIM. Just a photo set as the lock screen. A little girl, hands zip-tied, head down in the corner of a storage room. Not Lena. Another child. Quinn's heart chilled. This isn't about ransom, she said. This is infrastructure. Captain Tran's jaw tightened. Then it's time to burn it down. They regrouped at the precinct by 3 a.m. The plan came fast, a staged prisoner transfer. Unmarked van. 2 plainclothes officers. Location leak controlled and deliberate. The idea wasn't just to bait the handlers, it was to force them to move, react, panic. Thor would be inside the decoy vehicle. Not in the rear, but up front with Quinn, trained on scent tracking, motion cues, and spatial recall. He knows Eli, Quinn said. He's logged his scent, but more than that, he knows when fear changes direction. Martin looked skeptical. We're betting this whole op on a dog's intuition. Thor stared at him once, then walked to the table, placed his paw gently on the folder of Lena's sketches, and sat. Quinn didn't have to say a word. By sunrise, the van was ready. Eli, sedated and strapped in, had no clue the transfer wasn't real. He was being moved to federal custody, escorted by 2 decoys. Quinn followed in an SUV. Thor lay across the back seat, eyes trained on the horizon like he could already see the ambush forming. The route was chosen carefully, isolated enough to allow interception, populated enough to look routine. 15 minutes in, Thor stirred. Quinn glanced up. What is it? He sat upright, head angled toward the passing storage yards near the canal. Nothing looked different, but Thor's posture stiffened, breath shallow. Then he gave a single bark. Sharp, targeted, like a command. Quinn slammed the brakes. Behind them, the decoy van kept rolling. Ahead, from behind a dumpster, a small drone lifted, paused mid-air, and zipped toward the van. Remote surveillance! Tran's voice crackled over comms. Do not stop the decoy, Quinn said. Let it run. We follow Thor. Thor was already out the door. He bounded toward the alley beside the canal, nose locked on something only he could smell. Quinn chased after, radio in one hand, heart hammering. He led her down 2 blocks, past the canal wall, and into a run-down mechanics lot. There, behind a loose sheet of corrugated metal, was a hole dug into the foundation. Fresh soil, and the faint sound of static, like a radio left on in a hurry. Inside, they found another phone, and a burner walkie-talkie still live. A voice crackled through. They're moving early, prep site 3, she's awake. Quinn and Thor locked eyes. Whoever she was, she wasn't Lena, and this was no longer just a rescue, it was a race. And Thor had just picked up the scent. The convoy moved slow. Too slow. Thor sat in the rear of the second vehicle, harness tight, breath steady. But his ears told a different story. The kind of tension that crackled in the silence before a strike. He sniffed the air once, then again, then let out a low rumble, barely audible but unmistakable. In the lead van, Eli Mercer was slumped in his seat, eyes half-lidded from sedatives, his wrists loosely zip-tied to complete the illusion. 2 plainclothes officers sat up front, playing their roles, calm, distracted. Bait. The convoy turned off Harbour Way and into an alley flanked by old shipping warehouses and rusted containers stacked like tombstones. On paper, it was just a shortcut. In reality, it was the stage. 3 blocks in, the plan cracked open. A black SUV appeared behind the second vehicle. No lights, no plates. At the same moment, 2 figures in coveralls emerged from a hidden gap in the chain-link fence up ahead. One had bolt cutters, the other carried a jamming device disguised as a tool bag. Thor tensed. Quinn, driving the tail vehicle, saw the motion. "We're live," she whispered into her mic. "All teams on standby." The 2 intruders reached the lead van just as it came to a stop at a deliberately stalled forklift left in the road. One yanked the rear door open, the other climbed inside. "Package secure," a voice muttered into a radio. Then chaos. Before either man could react, the back doors of Quinn's SUV flew open. Thor launched into the air like a missile, 45 pounds of trained power, speed, and fury. He hit the second man mid-turn, knocking him off his feet and driving him into the side of the van with a thud that cracked ribs. The man screamed. The device in his hand flew. Thor didn't pause. He held firm, jaws locked on the padded vest, growling low enough to curdle blood. The other suspect tried to run. Didn't make it. The alley lit up, red and blue strobes flickering against the walls like lightning. "Drop it! Now!" Officers shouted from behind crates, barrels, rooftops. The SUV behind them reversed fast, only to slam into a spike strip laid down moments before. Tires exploded. Sparks flew. The third suspect, masked and armed, bailed out and sprinted down the alley. Thor looked up. Quinn gave a sharp whistle. The leash snapped free. Thor took off. No hesitation. No wasted steps. The fleeing man ducked through crates, tried to scale a chain-link gate. Thor hit the fence just as the man's boot lifted. He didn't bite. He rammed the suspect's leg, dropping him to the gravel, then circled once and stood over him, growling low, steady, immovable. Backup moved in. 3 suspects down. Eli untouched. The alley quieted except for the buzz of radios and the panting of adrenaline-slicked officers. One of the masked men, younger than expected, muttered as he was cuffed. "We were just told to extract him." "That's all. We don't even know who's running it." Quinn crouched next to him. "Then start guessing." The man looked at Thor, still poised, still watching. And for the first time, his confidence cracked. There's another site," he said quietly. "Not here, not even in this state." Quinn's heart lurched. "Where?" "Storage. Something," he whispered. "They move the girls when they get too old." Behind her, one of the officers vomited into a trash bin. Thor stood silently in the middle of the scene, body alert, tail stiff, like he knew the hunt wasn't over. Not yet. Not even close. It was over, at least this part. Eli Mercer and the 3 men from the alley. Sting were in custody by sunrise, faces hollowed by exhaustion and questions they weren't ready to answer. Their devices, once decoded, unearthed a web of digital footprints stretching along the eastern seaboard. Abandoned safe houses, silent docks, bank accounts opened under shell names in 3 different countries. The scope made seasoned agents sick to their stomachs. But it also gave them hope, because now, finally, there was a crack in the armor. At the city's Child Protective Center, Lena clutched a paper cup of apple juice with one hand and Thor's neck with the other. The room buzzed with cautious optimism. Social workers whispering updates, a volunteer adjusting fresh blankets on a cot. But Lena didn't notice. She had eyes only for the dog beside her. Thor sat still, close but calm, head angled towards her like he could feel every shake in her breath. And then, just once, she pressed her forehead to his and whispered with a fragile smile, "He heard me, and he came." The words weren't loud, but they reached Har like a flare in fog. That night, after the paperwork and the calls and the debriefings, Har didn't go home. She found herself on the porch of the station outpost, legs curled beneath her, coffee untouched beside her boot, watching the thin drizzle soften the edge of the world. Thor lay next to her, chest rising slow and deep, one ear flicking now and then when a drop tapped the wood railing. She reached down and ran her fingers along the scruff of his neck. "You did it, partner," she murmured. "You saved her." He blinked once. No theatrics, just the steady, quiet pride of a sentinel who knew his purpose. Across the street, the harbour stretched into the dark. Industrial cranes frozen in silhouette, a single rust-coloured trawler rocking gently at its mooring. The same boat Thor had led them past on the first day. Back then it had seemed empty. But they knew better now. They would find more. Somewhere out there, more children waited. Somewhere out there, others like Lena were whispering for help no one could hear. Unless you listened like Thor did. Unless you moved before the words came. Har leaned back against the wall and exhaled. Rain kept falling. Quiet, steady, relentless. And Thor? Thor didn't sleep. He watched the harbour like it still owed him something. Like somewhere out there, the job wasn't finished. Some say heroes wear uniforms, others carry guns, but sometimes they come on 4 legs, with fur matted by rain and eyes that never blink at the dark. If you believe in dogs like Thor, watchdogs who don't just guard but lead, help us share their stories. Subscribe to the German Shepherd channel. Because the world needs to know. Sometimes the one who saves you doesn't speak at all.